All right, folks, let's get it while the getting's good. Next up is it Ishan from Newtown. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Ishan Hardaway, and I'm a senior at Council Rock North, as well as the president of the NHS and team captain of the speech and debate team. I and my fellow peers are in full support of Policy 109, which allows students in this district full access to texts and resources. To attest to that, I want to offer my own personal experience about how that policy has benefited me. Back in 2020, before my junior year, I was given my summer reading list for AP English Language, which included The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. As a person of color, I've often felt both underrepresented and misrepresented in my education. I personally believe that books like Huck Finn use caricatures to represent racial minorities and overuse damaging slurs. So I took the liberty to contact my teacher and request an alternative assignment. The beauty of this practice is that I was able to engage in my education in a way which created a more meaningful and supportive learning experience. Thanks to my alternative assignment, I was able to read The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, which taught me important lessons about the risks of demonizing sexual behavior and insisting upon rigid moral structures. As a student of this district and a future voter, I believe we should listen to the advice of Nathaniel Hawthorne and be cautious when evaluating any changes, amendments, or additions to Policy 109. In my English class this year, I have learned from the wonderful Miss Morris Bauer the importance of symbolism in establishing culture. We have discussed how in classic texts like Beowulf and Hamlet, the limited role of women and their common status as objects symbolizes how societies view women. I believe we must utilize the same cognizance of symbols when evaluating our policy. If we were to restrict access to sexual, homosexual, racial, or even violent matters, I believe this would represent our district condemning and depreciating the role that content plays in the classroom. Instead, we as a district should continue to support education which expands students' horizons, encourages their curiosity, and informs their role in the classroom. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is Jeremy from Newtown. Good evening. Just state your last name, please.
Camp, Jeremy Camp with a K.
Thank you, sir.
I'd like to preface this by saying I am in full support of Policy 109 as it is currently written. I am against any change that would support this supposed opt-in policy that some of our board members have said previously. I've had the full Council Rock School District education. I started here at Newtown Elementary in first grade and I'm now a senior in 12th grade. A lot of people here and probably at home are questioning why I'm here. None of these policies that changes will probably affect me, given that I'm going to be going off to college next year. And to answer them, I have a brother who's a freshman at Council Rock North, and I'm here speaking for every student that is going to go and follow the same path that I have. The beauty of Council Rock North and the Council Rock School District is that the curriculum is centered around open discussion. We have times where we are doing rigid work, an hour each day, and then we have times where the class is completely open to whatever you want to talk about. This allows students to not only hear other people, but think for themselves and think about what they truly believe in. To get rid of these, to restrict the books that are supposed to be on this list would not only damage the open discussions that we want to have and want to encourage, but would also prevent teachers from actually being able to teach because these books encourage them and help them do their job. So to get rid of these books would just be, it would make no sense, and to change this policy in general would make absolutely no sense. We want Council Rock to remain the prestigious district that it is. We all pride ourselves in that. I pride myself in being educated here. To change that and to make it so that students are solely bookwork now in a world where open discussion is becoming the norm would be foolish, and it would be a disappointment to represent us, to have a school board and to be able to vote for a school board as I'm now 18. To have that happen would not only be a disgrace for me in my future as a hopeful person in government, but it should be a disgrace for those working and supporting this change in policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I believe it's Anne Marie from New Hope. Anne Marie from New Hope. Murray, last name possibly? Hi, good evening. Are you a resident of Council Rock, ma'am? Okay.
I assume we're still part of the Upper Makefield, I'm sorry. I used to live there. I'm allowed. I have, in fact, was a school teacher and taught political science, so I've got a little bit background. One of the things that I'm trying to understand is whether superintendents and the boards are going to start reading 12 hours a day in order to cover the objections that may be thrown up by parents that certain books should not be tolerated. I was interested in one of the lists of books that is being purported to be, should be banned basically from, and it's that Krauss list that comes out of Texas. And I think that's one of the things that many groups who are objecting to certain books are using those lists. Well, their basic policy idea is that books, these are the books that should be banned, books that might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, psychological distress because of race or sex. I'm thinking this wonderful exhibition that you all touted for the Holocaust might have fallen under this list or this policy. So before a school board takes on this responsibility to and even a superintendent to take on the responsibility of saying, because this group of mothers doesn't like a book about X, Y, or Z, we're walking into a morass. And I'm thinking that this really, if you look at the people where this comes from, the gentleman in Texas who made his list of 850 books, which I'm sure he didn't read, maybe one or two, but I would guess none. My thinking is these are issues that are being used to upset local communities in order to make points for people who are running. This guy is running for office in Texas. Nobody knew his name. Now I even know his name, Mr. Krauss. So I ask you to be really careful before you weigh in.
30 seconds.
Thank you.
Next up is Chris Kinsey from Northampton. Chris Kinsey from Northampton.
Good evening. First of all the students who spoke, your parents should all be extremely proud. You guys are brilliant. I'd like to start by saying thank you to all the members of the board who have been working in the interest of the staff and the students of the district, as opposed to focusing on interests of their own political careers and personal politics. As it relates to the current policy, 109, parents are at this time able to opt their children out if they are required to read materials the parents deem as inappropriate. This seems eminently reasonable, and I support the writing of official ARs to address this. That's the type of work the administration should be doing, and that's also where this issue should end. But for anyone who listened to the policy meeting last month, that's not where this seems to be headed. Anyone who has been paying attention knows that there's been a national movement to ban, censor, or restrict books on a wide range of subjects, including but not limited to sex, gender identity, race, and LGBTQ issues. Here in our own community, parents have bragged on social media about other groups of parents, quote, combing through all the books, unquote, to find even references to any of these topics, even if the books themselves aren't about them. The fact is, the creep of right-wing extremist politics into schools that we've been reading about in the news seems to be coming to our own community. And many of the people who wish to ban books or suppress information or marginalize anyone who isn't white or straight are the very same people who will preach about freedom, but when it comes to practice, they are proving to be more hypocrite than freedom fighters. Surely, certain members of this board have already taken their marching orders and will act on those, no matter what compelling argument anyone makes about why books deemed appropriate by school staff or librarians should never be censored, restricted, or banned. This community will not stand by and allow books to be censored or banned here in our public schools. With rampant reports of bullying, racism, swastika graffiti in bathrooms, harassment of minorities and LGBTQ students, I would contend that we need more of these books, not fewer. What if 2 weeks ago at the Education Committee meeting, one of the board members sitting here tonight told a group of teachers and principals that if they ever tried to close schools again, he would, quote, come after them, unquote. First, I hope our wonderful and hardworking teachers and principals and school staff are never intimidated by this type of outrageous and bullying and threatening behavior. But the way this board has been operating lately, including forcing out a competent, compassionate, and effective superintendent, it tells me that you aren't sufficiently intimidated by us, the voting public, because it's us who will be coming after you at the polls or through litigation if need be, if you continue down this road of extreme right-wing ideology. This community is better than that, and we will,
30 seconds.
This community is better than that, and while we failed to truly show that at the polls in November, there are more of us than there are of you or the people who we let put you in those seats. We will not let our schools become petri dishes for open racism, bullying, bigotry, or fascist ideology. Thank you.
Next up is Stephanie from Wrightstown. I would just ask you to state your last name, please. Thank you.
You mean you can't read or pronounce my last name, Barriateris? Barriateris is not an easy one. I'm Stephanie Barriateris. I'm from Wrightstown. I have 3 children in the Council Rock School District, and I'm here to speak in support of Policy 109. I'm here to say that if our board ever wished to change this policy, that you should consider the impact that it will have for our children who see themselves in those books, which might be under discussion. And perhaps you know this bit of history from reading. Jane Elliott was a teacher, 3rd grade teacher in a town in rural Iowa. The year was 1968, and Martin Luther King had been shot the night before. She walked into her classroom that morning and thought carefully, how do I deal with this with my 3rd graders? Her statement to them was, how do you think it would feel to be a black boy or girl? All of the children were white. It would be hard to know, wouldn't it? Unless we actually experienced discrimination for ourselves. Would you like to find out? And she had nods of agreement from her 3rd graders. Elliott separated the 3rd graders. She separated them based on blue eyes, brown eyes, and green eyes. And she told the children that the brown-eyed students were smarter with a very clear explanation. The children with brown eyes were smarter because it's determined by melatonin. So she separated the children. And the children with brown eyes were able to get more recess time. They were given more appreciation nods. They were able to pick the books first. You get the idea. And so Elliott said in her book that the change was instant, that the children with brown eyes were more confident and also more condescending, that they hurled insults at blue-eyed kids. And then suddenly the blue-eyed kids started making mistakes that they hadn't before, and she concluded that it was based on their behavior, timid, despondent, losing confidence. And so this historical event, I'm sure, is known by many of you, and I'm sure it's known by educators across the country, because it's telling us
30 seconds.
that people judging others on their skin color, their gender, their religion, or sexual orientation is indecent and it's not fair. And I speak tonight in honor of the 3 young people who were lost in our school district in 2007, and to my son's friend, Breslin, who I lost 4 years ago. And I say that with all the emotion that you hear in my voice. This matters to our children.
Next up is Teddy Schaefer from Newtown. Teddy Schaefer from Newtown.
Good evening. My name is Teddy Schaefer, and I'm a senior at Council Rock North. I'm here to talk about Policy 109, a policy which I support currently as it's written and as it's stated. However, at the policy committee held on March 14th, certain sentiments were given by board members that I feel I need to speak on as a queer and trans student in this district and community. When I was in middle school, I had a very difficult time with my gender and sexuality. For those of you who listened to me at that policy meeting, bear with me, it's going to be basically the same reiteration. But for those of you who haven't, this does deal with difficult topics regarding mental health, so if you don't like that stuff, don't listen. I had a lot of internalized issues with who I was, having thoughts such as, I'm not a good person because I'm queer, or it would be so much easier for everyone else if I weren't here. And even now, I still wish that I wasn't transgender. Standing right here, currently, greatly regret ever being trans, not that there's any option in it, but the fact that I have to speak on this is difficult. I wish every day that I could just be a regular cisgender boy, but it's not reality, and to be honest, I found more comfort in books that showed people like me more than anything else, second to the support of my friends. Representation is so important and critical in literature, specifically for LGBTQ+ students. There is so much hatred and homophobia within our district alone that students need to know it's okay to be who they are. We don't realize it, but students are being called slurs within our buildings alone. At the high school level, it took a friend of mine a month to get a slur written off, or a slur scrubbed off of the bathroom wall. They went to the front office, a teacher, and the principal, and again, it took a whole month to get that written off, or, sorry, rubbed off. At the middle school, LGBTQ+ students are being barked at in the hallways. That is harassment. There's nothing being done about it, and that is a huge issue. So rather than focusing on our time on potentially restricting or censoring representation in our books, we should spend more time actually addressing the issues that are going on within our school that are harming those who need those representation. So again, to reiterate, queer representation and representation just in general is extremely important, and I hope you take that with just a little grain of salt or something, I don't know. Thank you.
Next up is PJ Donovan from Newtown.
Good evening. My name is PJ Donovan. I'm a junior at Council Rock North High School. I've come to speak to you tonight on the basis of Policy 109. Let me state that I agree with the policy as written, but I completely disagree with any possible revision or misuse of this policy, as I believe it limits students from accessing beneficial material. I am so lucky to go to school in this district, a district that has always done its very best to provide students with content and tools necessary to grow and learn about the world around them and themselves. I do understand some families may feel some content is not appropriate for their student to access, and while that is completely acceptable, what I feel is inappropriate is to allow those restrictions to extend to other students as a revision of this policy would entail. As a student myself, I have always valued exposing myself to viewpoints and experiences that differ from my own, whether that be through literature found at school or other media. If students and families make the decision to limit the content to which they expose themselves, they are free to do so under the current policy. However, censoring the content for other students like myself, who only want to use it to enhance their education, would be unjust. I believe the decision regarding the subject matter students are able to access should be made by the students and their family and those alone. It is because decisions like this vary so greatly from student to student and family to family that it is not right to censor materials for all students, but to give them the freedom to do so as they see fit. Going to school in this district has taught me so much about how to learn and grow with the world around me, and I sincerely hope that we continue to extend that opportunity to the students in this district with the necessary tools by not revising Policy 109. And with that, thank you so much for your time, and have a great night.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Next up is Chuck Briskin. Chuck? Just state what township you're from, please. Thank you. Is that right? Briskin? B-R-I-S-K-I-N, from Newtown. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Briskin. I am the senior rabbi of Shir Me Congregation in Newtown and a member of the Newtown Yardley Ministerium, an interfaith clergy group. And I'm also a parent of 2 sons at Council Rock North, including one who spoke earlier. I am very much in support of Policy 109, and I also want to thank my son for bringing this to my attention. It is vital that the development of administrative regulations remain in the hands of our expert educators and credentialed librarians. It is also vital to codify the existing practice, which currently allows the parents or guardians to determine what they deem appropriate or not for their children to read. I do agree with the American Libraries Association assertion that it is a parent's responsibility to guide their own children's use of school libraries and resources, not yours, not mine. I want to share a brief lesson about Jews and our relationship with books. The Talmud is a medieval code of Jewish law compiled about 1,500 years ago that continues to guide and govern traditional Jews today. Each page contains a central text, and surrounding it you will find different opinions from many rabbis who actually wrote at different times in history over the course of several hundred years. When the Talmud was codified, all opinions, including and especially dissenting opinions, were included. Any person who reads a page of Talmud has access to a dizzying array of different viewpoints, some of which we may agree with and others not. The point is that no viewpoints are being censored. All are included on the page. It would be unjust to limit access to books. Our children need to discover books that may help them better understand themselves, as we've heard from many of our bright and brilliant students tonight. They need to discover books in which they see a version of themselves. Limiting access to these books to all students because one of us finds its themes uncomfortable or objectionable because of our own personal viewpoints is undemocratic, and it violates so many of our core values. So please adopt Policy 109 as written without changes to codify this practice, and please leave the administration of our school libraries in the hands of our trained librarians and educators. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Lisa from Washington Crossing. Lisa, I'm just going to ask you to state your last name for the record, please, when you get up here. Thanks.
Lisa Danella from Washington Crossing. I came here tonight to be able to voice my support for the Library Policy 109. As a college professor whose specialty is in the importance of diversity in children's toys, storybooks, and media, in terms of how that makes children feel about themselves, their happiness, their wellness, as well as their academic achievement. And as the mom of 2 children, and I am very happy with the education that they have received here in Council Rock this far. I had prepared statements, and I have to say that there is nothing that I can say with all of those credentials that is going to have anything to add to what our students have said here tonight. So I'm going to implore each of you to be able to really think about what the kids have said to you tonight and to be able to consider their support of 109. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the final speaker will be Ellen Schneider from Newtown Township. Ellen Schneider. Oh, thank you.
My name's Ellen Snyder. I am a supervisor of Newtown Township. I thought I would come up and sort of approach this in a different fashion. When I was a kid, I loved to read. Science fiction was my journey into another world. It made me want to think about being a scientist or even an astronaut. From there, I went on to history books, where I learned about atrocities of war, and then I learned about the founding of our nation. After that, biographies, Stephen Hawking, Abe Lincoln, and Harriet Tubman. All of those benefited me in so many ways. So my point is, censoring this or any other kind of books is wrong, and especially the ones that are being talked about. We prepare future community leaders in Council Rock. When talking about race, gender, or sexual identity, we show our kids that we are not afraid of any topic that they might read in our library. It's better to read it in the library than learning about it somewhere else. Knowledge Knowledge is power, and ignorance, they say, is bliss, but I don't think so. I think ignorance is just plain ignorance. And so, please, don't censor our books in our school system. My kids went through Council Rock, and they are great citizens, and that's what we provide to our community, is great citizens. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Just for clarification, Valerie from Newtown, you did not make a check. Is this an agenda item? Valerie, is it Michael? Okay, I'll check. I'll move you over. Thank you. That's it for public comment for the first session. Second half will occur later in the agenda. Thank you.
Mr. Salomon,
Dr. Thorwart.
if I may, we have a large group of students in the audience who spoke out on Policy 109. If the board will indulge me, it was a consent agenda item, so we aren't anticipating changes to it. If the board would indulge me, can we move that up? Because I think some of these students would probably like to get back to studying or preparing for Disney or anything else. I don't see this as being controversial, and if the board will indulge me, we could do this consent agenda fairly quickly and show you we have no intentions of changing Policy 109, if that's okay with the board.
Yeah, it's fine with me. We'll move down to policy committee number B, or letter B. Dr. Thorwart, you want to?
Sure. I move to approve the consent agenda item B as contained to the attachment to this agenda.
Have a second? Mr. Hidalgo. Any objections? Any further comment from the board?
I'll just note that it's exactly as we discussed at the policy meeting, and it is Dr. Elliott's and the administration's exact words. So,
The attachment's in the agenda online. Mr. Frederickson, do you happen to have that available?
If I didn't lose it in the power outage.
I have it if you need it, Matt.
Dr. Thorwart, you want to walk through this, or just for the audience edification?
Sure. Look, we had a lot of people speak about it. The section in red is the change from the strike through below it. This reflects every other policy we've done where the superintendent or their designee shall set forth procedures and for parent or guardian to request student receive an exemption and to respond to complaints. That is literally the entire policy right there. And Dr. Elliott, if you want, you may want to comment. You asked for this, and the administration wrote it. So, do you see any problems with this whatsoever?
I do not, but I do want to clarify. I see a spelling error. It should be set forth instead of set for in the first line. So, Mr. Frederickson, if we want to make that change, as I'm rereading it, I'm like, that doesn't make sense the way it's written.
Or in there too. We'll get that, Matt.
This, I do not see an issue, you know, as this policy, this revision that we brought to the board for approval states, working on administrative regulations to provide some clarity for folks, which we are currently finalizing, and we'll have those ready in the very near future.
Okay,
Thank you. I thought we had a wide-ranging conversation, and in the end, we threaded the needle very well, and we arrived right back where we started, which was your recommendation. So that's it. I mean,
okay. Anybody else? Any objections? All right, hearing none, I'm going to ask the secretary to mark that with unanimous consent. Thank you.
I appreciate it, fellow board members. Thank you.
Absolutely. Dr. Thorwart, would you mind taking H, approval of meeting minutes, please?
Certainly. Let me catch up here. I move to approve the minutes of the meeting of the Board of School Directors held on March 3rd, 2022.
Second, please. Mr. Hidalgo with the second. Any comments from the board? Any objections? Hearing none, I'll ask the secretary to mark that unanimous consent. From there, we're going to go to items discussion, draft board's meeting schedule. Dr. Elliott, please.
Mr. Solomon. So earlier, several weeks ago, I socialized with the board a draft that is attached here for our board meeting schedule for the 22-23 school year. Typically, we will look at this schedule as a board at around this time of the year, and then have in our May meeting a vote to approve this schedule so that we can get it communicated to our community. This is a discussion item this evening, just to see if any board members have any questions or comments about this draft schedule as we prepare the final schedule for a board's approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elliott. Any comment from the board? I know for me, every Thursday counts. Every Thursday's here. So whatever way we move things, and we've done it in the past, we will move accordingly.
So I know we talked about what would be the right sequence of meetings in order to arrive at the board meeting, committee meetings. So to have it the last Thursday of the month would make more sense than having it the third Thursday of the month.
That would make more sense. The challenge is we would not have our solicitor on the fourth Thursday of the month because he has a prior commitment on the fourth Thursday every month, which is why we went with the third.
Yeah, Mr. Odago, please.
I'll just say thank you for, I think it was recommended by our new finance director to switch the finance meetings to the week prior to the board meeting, which actually doing it this other way and waiting 3 weeks has shown to show some problems. So it was a good suggestion. I just want to say thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, good to go?
Yes, thank you.
All right. From there, we'll move to letter B. Mr. Harris, you're going to produce a overview of the preliminary budget presentation. And if you don't mind, I'm going to remove this head, and I'll go over that way if you don't mind.
Certainly. And which button? I'm new here.
First time you use it. It's just the
Picture mute. All right. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the board, members of the community, thank you for the opportunity to talk about the general fund budget. We have been spending a majority of our time talking about issues other than finance. We have transportation on the agenda this evening. We talk about food service, and we are taking a deeper dive into the expected material for the general fund budget. Dr. Elliott is here to provide support and comment, and there will be a portion that I will turn over to her to discuss. Just a first overview, we have a budget preparation timeline. I won't go into detail here, but we are in the mid portion here. We've done our revisions to revenue and expense. Now we're talking about our large cost revisions. We are talking about the anticipation of attrition, retirements, changes in positions, benefit changes, any new initiatives that the board is currently considering, and we are seeking direction for a tax increase contemplation, which could include a 0% tax increase. I want to make sure that the board is aware that is within their rights to do so. We are looking for direction so that we can fulfill our legal obligations to get to May 5th with a proposed final budget. We need to adopt that legally. And then in June 16th, we have a meeting scheduled to adopt our final budget, which at that time the board would be obligated to enact a tax levy. Any questions about the timeline? Components of the Council Rock budget, from an accounting perspective, we've put them into 3 major buckets. There is a 4th bucket that we don't necessarily use all the time, which is the 9,000 series, which is any other revenues not assigned to the 6, 7, or 8,000 series. But the 6,000s are local revenue, real estate tax levy, or EITs, occupational taxes. Those are the lion's share of that area. The 7,000s are state revenue, which we have our state subsidy. You'll see the acronym BEF or SEF. That's our basic education subsidy and our special education subsidy, which is a state allocation. We usually don't find out about those until after the board passes the budget, because Harrisburg does not have a contractual obligation to pass the budget by June 30th. We also have state grants and Social Security and PSERS reimbursement, where we actually receive reimbursement on the money that we actually spend on salaries and benefits. And then finally, the 8,000s is the federal revenue. The access reimbursement is a large part of that, Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. At our last finance meeting, I gave you an overview of this budget, and you'll see some of those numbers that may seem familiar to you, and I hope that you've taken the time to digest those revenue budget numbers. Tonight, as a way of a visual, this is our current picture. We have about 77% of those, the 6,000s, of the total general fund budget lives in the 6,000s. So most of it is EITs or real estate taxes. We do have our smallest portion, which is the small sliver up top there, which is the revenue from federal sources. And then the next largest portion, about 22%, is from state sources. I do not anticipate a significant shift in what this pie looks like. The contemplation of all the revenue that we've talked about in previous meetings still stays on the line. The piece that remains to be seen are the real estate tax levy that the board needs to consider, as well as the finalization of the state budget, which would tell us our special ed and basic ed numbers for next year. The components of the expense budget is far more meticulous, and you see expense reports every month based in these 9 areas. 100s are salary expenses, wages we pay folks, extra duty contracts, some of the stipends for coaching and overtime for staff. 200s are the benefits across the board, your retirement, Social Security, medical expenses. 300s or purchase services from contractors outside, so that's our substitute costs, our contracts with the Bucks County Intermediate Unit, our legal, and some contractors that are not captured in other areas. 400s are the property services, and this is where we hope we don't have a whole lot of snow removal, so we can buy dump trucks next year, Mr. Taylor. Snow removal, utilities, etc. 500s are tuition and transportation. In the 500s, you also have captured our charter school costs, our tuition to non-public schools that are on agreements with the district, as well as out-of-district special education other than the BCIU. 600s, the books, the pens, the small technology, the things that really make things go in our classrooms, the equipment, our vans, trucks, large computers, or large machinery. In the 800s is a very, very small number of dues and fees that are otherwise not realized in any other area. And the 9,000s is the catch-all. If we can't capture it in 100s through 800s, we jam it into the 900s. And you will find that that's our debt service, our interest, and other miscellaneous expenses. Our annual operating expenses, no surprise, 46% of our operating budget is for personnel and salaries. Another approximate quarter of our budget is in personnel services, which are the benefits. That leaves approximately 25% for everything else. We call that the 300s to the 900s. And this cabinet has poured over line by line by line. I can't tell you how much detail that this cabinet has given to me to show that these expenses are substantiated in the budget. And there are some of these expenses that are contemplated that we hope we never have to incur. There are tuition expenses we need to contemplate. There are additional overtime charges that we need to contemplate. If we get an influx of students, we are receiving registrations now for students from out of country. So we need to make sure that we have staff and materials to support those students. So there are some contingencies built into this budget. But you see the lion's share of any school district's budget is anywhere from 75 to 85% of its budget in the people who do the work. So we can dive into those later, and I can give you more detail as we get closer to the adoption of the proposed final budget. Questions about this slide? I'll pause. I've said a lot of words. Am I blowing by anybody in the audience? Okay. How do we pay for things? We pay for things generally through the general fund. That is funded annually, year to year. These are annual expenses, costs that we are contemplating, whether it be anything in the 100s or 900s. But I want to underscore that budget lives from July 1 to June 30th every year. So when June 30th comes and goes, the budget is then closed. The expenses that we've incurred from that period, the proper accounting functions, we can take a 2-month look forward. If we get any bills of expenses we've incurred, say April, May, or June, and pay them in July or August, we can back fund them into the prior year. But if we write a purchase order for July 1st going forward, we cannot charge it back to the previous year. We have capital reserve fund, we have a debt service fund, and internal service fund. These are funds over multiple years. They pay our medical expenses, they pay our debt service, and they pay our projects. These are things that live outside of the general fund. So Mr. Taylor is responsible for making sure that the construction projects are moving on time. My job is to make sure that the capital reserve fund is properly funded so that checks can go out outside of the general fund. I'll pause here for questions. The impacts on our budget process, and I put it in capital letters, costs. Everything costs something. The district pays for goods and services just like any other business. Our forecasted increases this year, the things that keep me up at night that I don't know which are final until the board says yay or nay, are our charter school costs, our PSERS rate, our utility costs. Mr. Taylor has told us that we're forecasting a 6 to 7% increase in gas. I just got my notice from PECO that electricity is going up at my home about 13%. Water and sewer, we've had to make budgetary transfers because of increases that those municipal authorities have made. We end up paying that bill. We want running water, we want flushing toilets, we want to make sure that those bills are paid. We have to contemplate those costs in our future budgets. We also have contractual agreements. Transportation on the agenda tonight, custodial, substitute teachers, maintenance agreements, labor costs, and our software and licensing. Those are annual costs that make this district as excellent as it is. And I have to say, I was really impressed by the students and their eloquence when they were speaking passionately about subjects. I don't think I was that eloquent when I was that young. So these are the things that are impacting the contemplation of building the big puzzle that is the general fund budget. Additional impacts, and this is rare. We're in a very rare time because 10, 15 years ago, we were always talking about medical increases, and I remember starting as a teacher in the late 90s, I had medical insurance fully paid for by the board. And now we find ourselves where there are cost shares based on our labor agreements, and even those are becoming prohibitively expensive. But we're anticipating flat to no increase, to a push to no increase on medical insurance for next year. And I will say, I have to call out Dr. Lambert, thank you so much. Your special education costs are nominally increased in this budget. That's one cost area that can be incredibly volatile, but he and his team have been done yeoman's work to make sure that those costs are captured. It's to be determined. The reason why I don't have expenses for you that are actionable is because we're still waiting on some pieces. Collective bargaining, transportation. We have our applications that have come out for our insurance renewals. That's our general liability, property, cyber insurance. Our energy agreements, there are caps that are built into those agreements that we are notified so that we can build our budgets for next year, but some of those are still to be determined because CPI has hit 7, 8, 9%, and those agreements are triggered by some of those navigations in the economic indicators. We also are contemplating additional staff based on enrollment. If we suddenly have an influx of third graders at a particular school, we're going to need to add a teacher, or at the very least contemplate adding instructional assistants. We still have time to contemplate fully our retirements. The deadline for most was April 1st. We're still shaking out some of the final numbers on those. And again, we've been giving the board some ideas on the initiatives that we want to have for this year, for next year, into the future. And I want to turn it over to Dr. Elliott to talk about some of those initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. So when we talk about an initiative, we think about, as a district, we're always focused on continuous improvement. We want to continue to figure out ways that we can be better for the students and the families that we serve. And we do that through different initiatives that may or may not cost money. Sometimes they're one-time costs, sometimes they're costs that are going to have an impact on future budget years. And as we have done in the past, when we plan and we budget, we're always budgeting ahead. we're always thinking 5 years down the line. How do we prepare for what we may need to be doing 5 years ahead of us? So we always are thinking ahead with our planning and not just looking at the current year that's in front of us when we think about initiatives and we think about this budget planning. So that enables us to really be able to budget fiscally soundly and make sure that we're using the funds that we have to the best of our ability to be the best we can for our kids. So some of the initiatives that we're contemplating, and some of these are things that we had started talking about before the pandemic and we had to put on hold. And so they're kind of in a waiting pattern at the moment just to highlight some of those initiatives, and some have been discussed at different committee meetings in the past. So the fifth special at the elementary level really is a focus on STEAM, and the target of this special is about giving access to all of our elementary students to STEAM and to STEAM concepts. So we know, and as you heard tonight from the CSOs, the STEAM fields are some of the fastest growing and highest demand in the workforce today. And so we want to make sure our students have access to those skills and concepts so that they are prepared and have that ability to choose those fields if they do so. The middle school advisory period, many people know our middle school as having an RA, or a resource activity period. This is an initiative in particular that has a zero cost, but again, it is an initiative. It's something that is helping us when we think about learning loss and we think about helping our middle schoolers. Shifting this RA period creates opportunities for us to have second chance learning for those students that before they go home at the end of the day and have to do their homework independently, to check in with a teacher if they didn't quite understand something, or for a teacher to contact a student and say, you need to come see me before you go home today because I want to make sure you understood this concept we discussed in class today. The high school schedule and start times is one particular initiative that we had looked at before the pandemic. We had done a lot of exploration and research and really looked at what are some different structures that we can put in place at the high school level to increase student choice and to focus on student health and wellness. And that is an initiative that we'd like to consider contemplating in future years. Curriculum refresh and updates are something that we're always looking at. And in particular, there are certain areas of the curriculum that when we do an update in that area, it is more expensive than others. A perfect example of that is elementary language arts. When you're purchasing an elementary language arts program, it's a very comprehensive program with lots of parts because of reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and all the components with word study that go with language arts. So it's always a hefty price tag. So that's something that we have to contemplate as we look at future budgets. Instructional technology, we continue to look at ways to improve and refresh the technology that we have, whether it's refreshing the interactive boards that we have in our classrooms, the Chromebooks that our students use, our infrastructure. All of those pieces are important to our success as a district and our systems organization. We also look at initiatives that support different equipment needs, such as vans and tow trucks and vehicles and small projects that are important to maintaining our facilities. Staffing is sometimes an initiative where we need to look at particular additions in staffing. One example of this might be our increased number of students as English learners in our district and the need to be able to provide more support for those students with this influx of students that we've received recently. And then finally, an initiative that we contemplate is capital planning, as Mr. Harris talked about, looking at our facilities and other larger projects that we want to make sure we're budgeting for out into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elliott. We did a fiscal analysis to project our future costs, and in our synopsis software, we have a look back of actual spend in these cost areas from 2015 all the way to 2021. We compare that with the projected spend that's in the approved budget for this year, and then we base our future projections on any of the following: a fixed percentage growth rate, which could be a compound annual growth rate, CAGR, CPI, consumer price increase, index, or any contractual agreements. We also have a defined schedule, which would be something like our debt service schedule, which varies from year to year depending on the principal and interest that we have if we take on newer additional debt, or if we refinance. And additional grant revenue. For instance, we have our ESSER ARP money that will sunset in a year. We need to make sure that those revenues are removed from the budget in future years, so we leave that on a defined schedule. And then again, we have the staffing. We do budget projections based on the current staff that we have now, and we try to account for the average value of the position and any attrition or additions that we may anticipate need of. Salaries in the projections are tied to benefit locations, so the requisite Social Security, PEASers, and medical costs are tied to individuals, as well as the estimates grow upon the previous year's allocation. So if we find that there is an over allocation, we want to revise our current budget to make sure we get the money into the right line item and get as healthy of a budget as we want, as we can. We don't want to give a completely plussed up budget to you and then have a lot of money fall to fund balance. That would be, in my estimation, an exercise in futility, because we could always come back to you and say, we need more money, need more money, need more money. But if we have money consistently falling to fund balance, then it's unfair to the board and it's unfair to the community to say, why are we always raising taxes? As a former board member, I get that. I heard it all the time. Initiatives are folded into the existing budget line item as a cost. So once an initiative is contemplated and the toggle is turned on, it folds right into the appropriate 100s, 200s, 300s, 400s, as we've talked about in the previous slides.
Jason, if I could.
Sure.
And I apologize, you're already a slide ahead. Dr. Elliott, I realize the board and the cabinet and staff may be aware of your comments about new enrollment. We have a lot of people in the audience and watching. Can you just go dig deeper and explain what you meant by we're seeing more enrollment in our schools currently and where that's coming from?
Oh, you're speaking to the English language learners?
Yes, please.
Certainly. So what we've learned since December this year, we've had an influx of about, I'm going to lose my numbers, 23, I believe, new English language learners. And the majority of those students, they cut across grades K through 12. So a good majority of those students are actually beginning or entering language learners, which means they speak little to no English. So if you can imagine a high school freshman who speaks no English, who's suddenly put into an English class or math class or a science class and they do not speak English, it's very challenging. We are required to provide them with English instruction as well as supports in their classrooms. So having this addition that we weren't expecting is requiring us to provide some additional support for those students.
And why are they here? I know, but just go into it a little further.
Well, I think it depends on the students. We have some students who are refugees from Ukraine.
That's kind of where I was going, right.
Surrounding that, but not all of our new students are from Ukraine. So we do have some refugees that have arrived, yes.
And I think that's important, that the public understands that, not only are we taking in, people from Ukraine and elsewhere, that 23 means a lot when you talk about kids that need to learn English. So how do you quantify that with staff? And it's something that really developed over the last couple of months.
Yes, exactly.
Thanks. Sorry, Jason, that I wasn't quick enough.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it. If you recall from one of our first finance meetings together, one of my guiding principles of building a budget is to leave room for the unexpected. And certainly having a need for additional hours for instructional assistants or additional teaching staff is one of those that is certainly unexpected. So initiatives are estimated costs. They're linked to staffing, benefits, equipment, supplies. Any of those on the left can be actualized in our general fund budget in a line item. They're located in the appropriately generally accepted accounting principle code, that's GAAP, in the general fund, and the proper location, regular ed, special ed, facilities, technology, et cetera. So I want to be clear that when the teams have put together these contemplated costs, they are put into the proper area, the proper cost area. So it's very easy for me, if the board decided to say, let's move on this particular initiative, we'd fold those costs right into our PDE 2028, and we would be ready for a May adoption for a proposed final budget. In initiative impact, the board did receive slides that enumerated the entire costs, revenue, expense, and I want to thank the cabinet team for their feedback. It seemed a little cumbersome, so for those folks at home watching this on video, or in the audience, if you look from left to right, our 5th elementary special at 7.6 FTE has a total cost projected over 5 years about $3.2 million. You see each year there's a depreciating cost because we contemplate that there will be some retirements or transfers of lesser salaried staff. So more expensive staff retire, we hire less expensive staff in future years. Each of those are contemplated. The 5th special is also contemplated at 4.6 FTE. There was a request to see if we could fold in some existing staff to those positions. That's about a $1.1 million savings, so 3.2 to 2.099. Curriculum investments, as Dr. Elliott mentioned, some years it's really expensive, some years it's not. Remember, there are 10,500 souls that we're required to educate. And if you look at $1.5 million across the K-12 spectrum, that is not a very, very large number when you talk about per child. But each year, to take the pressure off of the budget, the curriculum team has decided to roll in and phase in, and that's Dr. Elliott and her team to make sure that we're not overwhelming our teachers with multiple implementations of new programs, and also making sure that we're preserving our room in the budget. But a 5-year cost estimate is approximately $4.3 million. Dr. Lambert has spoken to Education Committee about the gifted review and SEL support. We have an estimate, if the board were to act on that particular initiative, 5-year cost of about $907,000. $173,000 in the first year, and those costs are staying level because that's going to require new staff, and the new staff are at the average rate of our CREA bargaining unit, and that contemplates the increase in PSERS and Social Security, along with contractual increases. And then finally, this is one that has been a legacy issue from pre-pandemic, and I was speaking with Dr. Sanko. These are rather stale costs, but I wanted the board to take a look. The high school schedule revisions are the best work of the committee at the time. This was a K-12 initiative. The district-wide team felt that that was the best cost several years ago. High school administration now feels that they want to take a second, third, fourth look at this to get a better set, better parameters around what they'd like to see implemented. That will impact staffing costs, that will impact equipment costs, and Dr. Sanko has assured me that that those folks are working on that and making sure that they're getting their best foot forward. So that's a number that has lived in the projection software, and that is a number that the board has asked about in previous committee meetings, and it's my understanding that the high school administration has asked to take a pause on this initiative so that they could better evaluate the needs and get better costs to the board. It may cost more, it may cost less, but I defer to those experts. I'm just charged with putting the numbers on the line. Dr. Sanko, did you want to add anything to that? Okay. Thank you. Any questions about these initiatives? Impact to tax levy. It all boils down to this, the board's Super Bowl is June 16th, whether or not you enact a tax levy. And I have cases for why or why not. Yes, to implement a tax levy, it compounds year by year. So the levy that you enact now will compound over future years. It is limited by Act 1 law. This year, the board is allowed to raise taxes by 3.4%. We get projections of what Act 1 could be. We call that the IFO, the Independent Fiscal Office. They project out what Act 1 could be. It is forecast as of earlier this year, 4.6, 4.7%. That was before CPI changed. So I'm anticipating that they may go higher in future years. You can reduce the tax levy in future years if we find that we're collecting too much money. I've never had it happen in all my years as an educator, but there have been tax reductions in certain years, in certain districts. And it's also compounded by the increases to the real estate assessed values. So as land is developed, new homes are built, businesses are improved, the assessed values increase and the millage increases proportionally on those properties. A case for no tax levy, you cannot make up ground in future years. If the board finds that it needs to raise revenue beyond what it can legally raise in Act 1, it will have to go to referendum, which requires a ballot vote on the primary election. That is a lot of paperwork for myself and Mr. Cox. It's an enterprise that I've only seen work once in Bucks County recently, and that was for the funding of renovations to a high school. And this is probably one of the only tax increases that Pennsylvanians can have a shot at voting no at personally. Most of my time earlier in my career was spent in New Jersey, and every year we would worry about how many people would show up for or against the school budget because we didn't know. The school board didn't vote on it. They put it up for a vote, but the constituency would vote every year. That's not the case here. The board, it squarely lies in the board's prerogative whether or not you raise taxes. If you don't do a tax increase this year, it may require cuts to staff and programs to manage mandated costs. In a future slide, I do have a hyperlink to mandated costs across the state that are outlined in state code and federal code that the district must or the district shall provide certain services. English language learners is one of those shall provides. And finally, the assessed value reductions due to litigation, tax appeals, and the like will have additional impact if no tax levy is contemplated. Questions, thoughts, concerns? Mandated costs. Our large cost areas, one of the largest, about $41 million in our budget, is our PSERS rate. And it goes up every year. It may go up by 1% or 2%, but it does impact as we have contractual increases to staff salaries. We do have contractual increases that for labor, for services, fringe benefit costs. These are areas, for instance, our medical, we're thankful we're coming to you with a zero increase for our medical share and prescription costs. And again, our special education expenses, we have mandated, if it's in the IEP, we're legally obligated to provide it. And we need to make sure that we are taking care of those kiddos according to what the experts on the IEP team say that those students need. Other areas are PDE mandated costs, Act 44, safety and security, shall versus may in policy, code and statute. If it says a district may, that is an option. It is, and one of them is transportation. The district shall provide non-public transportation if it provides transportation otherwise. If it doesn't, it may provide it. So if we bus one kid to our school, then we need to bus all of our kids to whatever school they go to in the district. Safety and security needs, we shall provide for safety and security. We shall provide for homeless supports. And if you want to avail yourself, there is a hyperlink to the mandate document. It is about 15, 17 pages. It is eye-opening to what the mandated costs are. And I hear constituents say all the time, why does it cost so much to educate a kid? Well, that 25% of those 300s and 900s, a large majority of it is mandated costs. We might get a little bit of wiggle room in our 600s with our supplies, what kind of Chromebook we buy or what kind of pencil we buy. We can get, sharpen the pencil on equipment we purchase, but there are things that are absolutely non-negotiable that we're tied to in state policy, code, and mandate. Major impacts to revenue. Obviously, earlier we talked about the real estate tax levy. Currently, in any of our projections, our baseline is a 0% tax levy. You will see that yields an alarming rate 5 years from now. We might be able to dip into fund balance for 2 or 3 years, but we will certainly be in deficit spend in future years with a zero tax increase. Assessed value changes. If the assessed values go up, and according to our audit last year, they did increase approximately 0.03%, we currently contemplate a 0.01% increase. We could elevate that, but that's really dependent upon land development and real estate values. State subsidies could increase. We're contemplating a zero increase in revenue in that area. Special education, the same. If the governor does get his way on his proposed budget, I'll show you in a future slide what that would look like on the realization of additional revenue for the district. We do have transportation and access subsidies. We'll talk about transportation more in our finance committee, but we did get some more good news on the revenue end from Matt Adams, who's in the audience, that we will be receiving additional transportation subsidy this year, which will beat the budget for our revenue for this year, which is good news. But it is also a utilization. If we put buses on the road, we get the revenue back. If we cut the buses, then we don't get the revenue. Same thing for access, is the Medicare Special Education Supports and Services Program. There is a proposed reduction to reflect the actual utilization so that we can be fiscally responsible in that cost area to realize that eventually that access money may run out if we anticipate we're going to get reimbursed faster than we're spending money. So we spend money in 1 year, get reimbursed by access in another year, and write off costs and then realize that revenue in the third year. So we want to make sure it's a balance over several years. We talked about in the Finance Committee a couple of months ago that earned income taxes, we've got a forecast to grow approximately 15% in the next year. That is unprecedented. And that gives me a little bit of comfort to know that we have a little bit of room in the forecast to grow. However, I would not recommend that the board put that entire 15% on the revenue line. Currently, we have a 10 to 11% in the estimate because we're actually seeing that those gaps close from our anticipated revenue to our currently realized revenue. The impact of a 0% tax levy in 2023, I've shown in synopsis and to this board in the last finance meeting, projected revenues of about $253 million, 252, 811, 532. Projected expenses, and these do include some of the expenses, including transportation, contractual with forecasted substitute increases, as well as labor costs for a new custodial contractor, which yields $260 million in expenses, which yields a delta of about $7.2 million. If the board were to not enact a tax levy, there will be no opportunity for initiatives. This number does not consider any attrition or retirements. So Mrs. Taylor and I will be spending a lot of time together to make sure that those numbers are accurate in our payroll projections. We have two options. The board can use fund balance. We have about $30 million in fund balance, so it would go down to about $23 million in the following year. Or the option two would be to cut expenses, which would mostly be personnel, and or hedge our bets in revenue projections, which would be the BEF or the EIT.
Mr. Harris, I really don't like when people interrupt presentations, but I feel a need to ask, please. Projected expenses, do they include any new initiatives?
They do not. Okay, go on. All right. The option one, this is directly from synopsis. You can see in the 2023 budget, the $7.2 million midway of the page, net operating results. That's 252 minus over the 60 gives us 7.2. You can see if there's a zero increase, service tax increase, you reach a $48.7 million deficit in 2027. That's everything we're spending now, everything is contemplated, growth rates, contractual increases. These are projections to any cost area that we have a growth rate we can tie it to. Then option two, why option one? No cuts to existing program or staff. Every position is safe. Every program exists as it currently does. There is no tax increase. It is a status quo budget for this year. The disadvantage there is a $48.7 million deficit by 2027, and I don't know anybody who would run their household budget on a $48 million deficit. And it also limits our opportunity for initiatives in future years. That's the one thing that I want to get across to this board, that a 0% increase at present leaves all those options off the table that we talked about. Option two, reduce expenses. For our retirements, our open positions remain unfilled, and we could reduce headcount of existing positions. That means cuts to existing staff. We also could contemplate cuts to program or operations, delay or defer purchases. We have about $2 million in Chromebooks that we could delay. We have capital expense, some vehicles, technology, building equipment that we're looking to purchase in this year that we could cut or delay. We could move them to capital expense, which is a separately funded budget other than the general fund. We could also curtail or reduce delivery of services. One is, for instance, to enforce our walking zones, which is about a $1.4 million savings. We could reduce our nursing services to our non-publics, proportionally to our publics. And then also our instructional supports. I can tell you that coming from other districts, Council Rock is rich with this instructional supports that meet the needs of its students, and these are vital. And I would discourage you from considering any of these, but I'd be derelict in my duty to tell you that these weren't real bona fide options. But they, in my opinion, they're draconian, and they would set the district back multiple years. And if you wanted to bring them back, it would take a referendum of Herculean effort to restore. Major impacts to these cost areas, put some dollars to this. Program or equipment delays, estimated $5 million reduction to expenses. Unfilled positions would be about a $2 million reduction to expenses. I won't go into the detail, but these are some of the things that Cabinet has contemplated. The board has seen some of these in prior years. These are not palatable, these are not recommended, but these are legitimate options that the board could act upon. And again, I want to underscore that I would never in a million years recommend that you do these things to just close a budget gap, because it does impact, remember I said 10,500 souls. It does impact a large portion of those souls that we're looking to impact for our future. We could adjust our risk tolerance on our revenues. In Governor Wolf's budget, we could yield a $2.1 million increase to revenue in basic education funding. I have it on pretty good authority that the governor's budget's dead in the water, so I would not put any stock in that. We may get a 1 to 2% increase over our current allocation, but this is 12 to 15% over our previous year's allocation. We could also consider moving the EIT projection more in line with what the Keystone Collections Group did forecast for us. We currently have $19.5 million on the line. We could increase that to the $20.5 million. If the board acted on both of those, you could add $3.1 million to the revenue budget. So it goes from 252 to about 256. We could also temper our tolerance for charter school costs. 3 years ago, we spent about $1 million in charter school. We are currently on track to spend about $2.7 million in charter school costs, special education costs, as well as regular education costs. A majority of those students do enjoy a placement in a cyber charter school. The board could contemplate having some of those students come back. If they don't come back and we still get the bill, we're required to pay it. The board is going to act on a transportation contract tonight. We've been showing increases of approximately 12 to 14% on the high end. This is one area that we will certainly bake back in once the board acts on the transportation contract tonight. But this is a cost area of volatility that is not a normal course of business for school districts. We could also take an attrition risk, contemplating 27 to 28 retirements. We could go less or we could go more. If we don't get the retirements that we are expecting, our salaries and benefits will be overspent in our allocation areas. We could also stagger delay implementation of any initiative. We could also delay capital transfers and or projects. I will speak for Mr. Taylor. And Doug, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but he's taken a great pains to develop a plan that this board has really bought into for the renovation and refurbishment of facilities. And the capital spending plan that is currently on the books is sound and it is affordable. Any change in future borrowings, any change in capital transfers would essentially derail those efforts. And as we've seen with some of the cost estimates for contemplated borrowing for Richboro Elementary, those costs could increase anywhere from 10, 15 to 20% if it were kicked down the road a year or 2 or 3. So that comes with a significant savings, but it also comes with a significant warning. So it is really the risk tolerance that the board's willing to take. I'll pause there for questions. Why option 2? It does force efficiencies in some cases. Fewer people means that fewer people do more work. Sometimes that's more efficient, sometimes that's less efficient. Those efficiencies can be improved. It controls the costs in the immediate. It does afford us the ability to not raise taxes. and it does give us a smaller deficit in future years. That does not contemplate that there will be zero deficit budgets in future years, but there will be certainly, if we dip from fund balance or hedged our bets or cut staff proportionately, you would have a smaller deficit. It does limit our response to student need, and Dr. Elliott very eloquently spoke about the emergent need that's just come in the past few months for our English language learners. It, again, limits our opportunity for initiatives in future years, and probably the largest is if you cut it now, you're going to have to raise more money in taxes and possibly to a referendum if you exceed the allocations or your limit in Act 1. The board has seen this slide. I thought it was a value added for this particular presentation. A 1% tax increase on the bottom, a flat 1%, which is built into one of our projections, yields over 4 years $6.9 million. It only closes our budget gap currently by 1.7 in next year. Conversely, the 3.4% in the Act 1 at the very top yields about $5.8 million based on current assessed value. Over 4 years, the board will realize approximately $30 million in revenue that could go to some of the initiatives that it's contemplating over the next few years. There is a middle road that the IFO minus 1%, so if IFO is 3.4, then the IFO minus 1% is a 2.4. It yields $4.1 million in revenue in year one and comes to a total yield of revenue for approximately $22.1 million. So in future years, remember what I said, if the board doesn't act upon the full Act 1 this year, it cannot take any of the percentage it left on the table in previous years and fold it into future. It's limited by law. Next year it's 3.9. It may be 4.9 after, one second, after CPI and all the wage data comes in. Ms. Pally.
So when you had the slide for the different initiatives that we all talked about how important they are in order to address the educational loss and so on, there was a dollar assigned with each one of them.
Yes.
So I can assume like a really super good case scenario that we want to implement all of them. Is that even possible? Even if we go at 3.4%, would that be sufficient?
So I do have slides later in the presentation that would contemplate an Act 1 minus 1%, the IFO minus 1%, and I'm happy to build, I got direction from, the consensus of the board was to build them less than our Act 1. I'm happy to build those models for you to contemplate. I can show in the next couple of slides the impact to the average homeowner. I have a nice pivot chart that would show what 3.4 would look like compared to a 1 to the individual, and I'm happy to build that and have it ready for the next finance meeting.
So I'm not saying necessarily to go over the 3.4%, but to understand, given these different scenarios, what is possible in terms of initiatives.
The board is well within its legal right to increase taxes to 3.4%. And but I've only built scenarios less than. So IFO minus 1 is currently the ceiling that we will present to the Finance Committee. And if it's the will of the board, I'm happy to do additional modeling what a 3.4 would look like. So if I'm happy to take
No, because we talked about educational loss and how we're going to address that. But at some point, we have to understand we have to pay for it. So, and in order to create these initiatives, we have to figure out what would be the best way to pay for them, and maybe don't do them all at once, but have a plan and play with revenue versus expense and figure out what would be the best. I'm not saying we have to go, it's not a set number that we have to go over or under. It's what is necessary to do what we need to do.
Certainly. I appreciate that comment. I just want to take a moment and thank my assistant, Michelle Pollack, who did lion's share of this work, getting a pivot table ready for me. She saved me hours and hours of work. So Michelle, if you're listening, thank you. This is an impact of a 1% tax increase to the property owner, to an average property owner. $38,800 is the average assessed value in all of the townships that serve Council Rock. If the board enacted a 1% tax increase, the impact to the average assessed home would be $51.53 per year. At a 1.5, it's $77.29 per year. At 2%, $103.06 per year. 3%, $154.59 per year. And at the Act 1 max, $175.20. So if you look at it, it's about $50 per percent for every average taxpayer. Now, the board had asked for a wider swath of assessments, and this is a revision to the PowerPoint that is currently on board docs, so we will upload that revision. People can take a look at what their assessed values are and see realistically what the contemplated tax increase would be impacting to their bottom line. And I think it really, it's not lost on me that there are folks who have fixed incomes and there are folks who have unlimited incomes in certain cases. And we want to be respectful of all of our constituents when we contemplate a tax increase. So I'll move through again. 1%, $51, 1.5, $77, 2%, $103, 3%, $154, 4%, $175. Any questions about that pivot table?
This was not in the deck.
It was not.
Can you provide us?
Absolutely, absolutely. This was, again, the feedback from the team when we did a dry run. I had this in my back pocket for finance in a couple of weeks, but the team felt it was very, very powerful add to the presentation. We rely on each other to succeed here. And then we have instead of going into the software and toggling on, I know the hour is late, I wanted to get through this. This is our baseline, no new initiatives, 0%. That's the slide. This does realize a smaller deficit because we did get updated numbers in our transportation subsidy, so we did bake that in. So instead of a $48 million deficit, we're now at a $46 million deficit. So the better numbers we get with some of those to be determined, we will get closer and closer to closing that gap. To add some, fifth special at the 4.6 with a flat 1% tax, we would be $22 million in the hole, bottom right-hand corner. To add a little more, to add our ELD support, our substitute pay, keeping the fifth special, we have, and that is a half of an IFO, which is 1.7%, gets us to a positive fund balance in year 5, but it's only $91,000. Not a tolerance that that would encourage the board to entertain. And then conservatively, as the board is directed, to add do most, and these are a staggered layered approach, as you've indicated, Mrs. Pally, to have a staggered approach to all of these in different years. This contemplates an IFO minus 1% over 5 years, so that would commit the board to that level of action in future years. But it still does put us perilously in danger of our fund balance policy, which is about $15 million. We have a fund balance policy of 5%, and 11.1 or $12 million is slightly under that. But you can see that it keeps everything in the, it adds the staff instead of going to the 4.6. So there are permutations that we can turn on and turn off. I'm happy to do that at finance at a more appropriate time, but I see that there's a question. Mr. Hidalgo.
Thank you. I'm just trying to follow the numbers and do my own little math here. Based on all I really see on the deck in the board docs is the option 1 use of fund balance, and I can see there is no tax increase used there, and there's just some small increases due to assumptions. If you go through these slides, I'm trying to compare the total revenue, and I'm seeing the revenue changing. Different numbers, so I guess the revenue looks like it's increasing in these scenarios.
Yes, so the total, I'll start 254,713 in the following year budget. That's a 1% tax increase. This is 1.7, so 254 to 256. million. And then in the next year, 257, that's your 2.4%?
Yeah, I see that. So you're putting some scenarios together here
Correct.
with some assumptions of tax increases.
Correct.
Okay. Good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And so it is feasible to contemplate doing all of this work, but it will increase, it will require a tax increase larger than the IFO minus 1%. Yes, ma'am.
So what happens to the fund balance if we don't use it? Can we move it to the next, for how long, and do we have to use it? Is it like, what are the requirements for that?
So there is no statutory requirement to use fund balance. The board is required statutorily to allocate it to contemplated expenses. Currently, we have educational initiatives of about $4 million, and then COVID-19 recovery of about $14 million. And then there is an unassigned fund balance. By law, we're allowed to have a $12 million fund balance that is unassigned to anything that the board would so choose to use it for, so that you could close your budget gap legally by using that $12 million. And there's no statute of limitations on how long it would take you to use it, but we enjoy a healthy credit rating because we have a very healthy fund balance. And in future years, when we're contemplating borrowing for North and South, when those buildings come due for the renovations, there's not going to be 10, 20, 30 million, it'll be in the hundreds of million. And those debt services, you will need some of that fund balance to stem the tide as you grow your budget to realize the mortgage payments, the bond payments on those expenses. Yes?
These slides are not in the board docs?
They are not.
Can you go back to the first one,
Sure.
please, so we can kind of look at the lowest option first, because I think that's where we wanted to start. And then kick up to the 1%, just so they can see,
1%?
if that's what you did.
Yes. So you see on the bottom right in the property tax, flat 1% tax increase, 22 through 27.
How much of the initiatives can fit into that?
Only the fifth special, but in 5 years, you'll have a $22.5 million deficit.
Deficit. Mhm. I'm going to save my comments and let other people talk. All right. Continue your presentation unless there's questions.
I'll continue. So we started with baseline, add initiative, add a little more, and do most. We at finance, we can turn these on and off, change the tax impact to show what a balance. If the board can coalesce around what initiatives it wants, then I can give you a reasonable path forward and contemplate a tax increase in the future. Yes, sir.
Jason, was any effort put into reducing costs in the 75% section of the
So line by
personnel?
line, yes. So the first go-around with the budget talks did have kind of an all-in, and we went line by line saying, do you need it? Is it a need or is it a want? And a lot of those areas were in technology and facilities. And there have been some cuts that have been realized in previous years that have not been restored. So they're bare bones.
I would like to see, not tonight, but just projected head count every year of these things. Just total number of people. So.
And then the next steps, this is the last slide, I promise. The next steps in the timeline, we have discussion at April 21st Finance Committee. We need to finalize our proposed final budget so I can get it on the 2028 so that we can get it out to the public and advertise the board meeting for the 5th, which the board will then contemplate adopting the proposed final. I warn you, I did go through the exercise of defeating a proposed final budget, which only kicks down the June 16th meeting. So if anybody has vacation plans, I would encourage you to consider your statutory duty beyond June 16th. May 12th, we have a finance committee. We will revise and review based on feedback from the board and our additional costs. We also have a joint finance facilities committee to revise and review. So we have several cracks at the apple before we get to a final budget on June 16th. But it will move fast and furious. And I welcome questions, I welcome comments. Call me, email me. I'm happy to, we can go to lunch and talk. Mr. Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Harris. A couple things from my perspective. One, and I think I'll take some steam away from Mr. Hickey. None of these assumptions have any Richboro scenarios built into it with as far as debt service.
So, yes, they do. The borrowing for Richboro Elementary, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Taylor, but was contemplated in the 23 borrowing.
Okay.
It's
On all these scenarios.
correct.
Yeah, and okay, that's good to know. And then the next thing I would ask, and the team could work on this, I think it's important to hear what the priorities of the team are, not necessarily what the priorities of the board is, because that's a good starting point to know what you find most important. Because we've discussed high school scheduling many moons ago. Is it still a viable thing? Is it something we need to do now? Is it something that can sit a little bit? Is the special more important than whatever else is on your list? So I personally would like to see what the team would like. And then we can, from my opinion, we can start working that. But in this is all being said, we still have schools that are overcrowded. We need to come up with plans for that as well. So that can't get lost.
Understood.
Anybody else from the board? Mr. Odago, please.
Yeah, thank you. I feel flashback to when me and Mr. Bialik were doing these things for the last couple of years, and I still have the same feeling. Could we go back to the slide a long time ago, option 1, fund balance, use of fund balance that showed 0 tax increase and just your projected no? It would be the synopsis sheet, that one. Thank you. So if you look at the revenue, we already talked about that. That's increasing at about 1.6, 0.5, not much the next year, under 1%. But some assumptions there, I know you have them for a good reason. What concerns me is when we look at, we're not doing any of the initiatives, no increase, but just the budgets as it sits now, which makes the contractual agreements that we came up with. We are looking at 10 million increase in total expenditures next year, and another 7+ million, 7.5 million, that's $17.5 million in 2 years. That's 3.4% year over year. I'm sorry, 3.8% for first year and 2.9, so almost well over average of 3% increase without doing any initiatives, not building any more schools, not doing anything. That's all just due to the contracts that we've agreed to. So this changes everything. Obviously, anything we don't do increasing above 3%, we're going to be using our fund balance, our hope for better revenues than we're expecting. And that's something that we have to build into it. We've made these obligations, but we're looking at anything below 3% is going to be eaten from fund balance, and there's no room to grow, to do what the initiatives we want to do. So I think we had a nice spike in revenue, $10 million. We might be giving that back very quickly. And so focusing on revenue and what we expect there is going to be very important, because we're going to be threading a needle over the next few years if we don't. So we might have to hire our mark. And I'll just put in there, for the public's sake, I always thought that when I walk and knock on doors and people asked me and agreed that I should represent them, it's those older people and fixed incomes that really concerns me every time we raise taxes. And if there was some way, if we could contemplate and understand what the effects would be if we could give some kind of tax break. I think it's legal somehow in this country, in the state. I think some people do it. That's the vulnerable, economically vulnerable constituencies. If they were to qualify for something, I'd like to figure out that. I wish somebody with more knowledge in it would help me figure that out, because I think a lot of us can afford these tax increases of $150 a year. And it adds up, 600 over 4 years. But other people, I worry for them, and I have to say that we got to do something for them. Just put it out there on the record that I'm more than willing to do something like that. But the bottom line is, we're looking at 3%, 3.2 average the next 2 years before we even increase any more of our costs. That's something to chew on and be ready for the Finance Committee meeting in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hidalgo. Anybody else from the board? Mr. Roosevelt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, for putting this together. I think this was a significant amount of information for both the board to think about as well as the community. I have a couple questions and a couple comments, so if you'd allow a little bit of latitude here. If we go back to the slide that has the pie chart, which has the annual operating expenditures, it reflects, as you articulated, an obvious element here that 75% approximately are going toward staff and benefits. And the rest of everything is going for kids, equipment, supplies, outside contractors, et cetera, is about 25%. If we could now also jump forward to the impact on the community with respect to taxes.
You mean the?
Oh, sorry.
The pivot chart?
Yeah, the pie chart, annual operating expenditures was the first thing that I was commenting on. Right, yeah. So as you pointed out, we got the purple and the yellow that represents 75% that is staff salaries and staff benefits. And if we could also roll to the impact to the homeowner,
Sure.
which I think was later.
Close your eyes. Don't get dizzy.
There we go. So here, are we representing that the average homeowner in this area makes, let's just say for argument's sake, $40,000 to $60,000? Is that what this is reflecting?
No, this reflects the average assessment on your tax bill.
Got it. Okay. So for some community parity, I guess the Bucks County employee salaries, people that work for the county, from salary.com is about $135,000. From our annual salaries from CRSD, average staff salaries is $103,890 back in 2020. And I think the Bucks County data reflects the median household income in Bucks County is $93,767. So for some community parity, what we have is staff of the community and staff of the school getting paid more than the average community member. So that's why I thought this was important. While it looks like it's a low number, we also have, I think, in a lot of our districts, about 60% of our constituents are taxpayers that don't send a kid to the district. So when I say I think this is a lot of information for both the board to consider as well as the community, this is what we're talking about. I'm concerned because the scenarios that you projected demonstrate that we're very close to at risk of handcuffing ourselves to tax increases, and there's a lot of costs that we can't control nor predict in here that you indicated keep you up at night, and we have not a lot of margin of error. We're also potentially handcuffing future boards by the decisions that we're making. We do have a lot of initiatives, wonderful things. So I like your presentation because it sets all of these things out. And I am really looking forward to hearing comments from the community as well as this administration on what initiatives they prioritize so that you from finance can present some projections on how we get there, and we as a board can review and deliberate and discuss how we can make that happen. But it's concerning because this is reflecting tax increases that we can't avoid and will handcuff future boards to do the same. So hearing from the community is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roosevelt. Anybody else? Dr. Thorwart? Mr. Hickey, please.
Mr. Harris, like I said, appreciate the presentation. Enlightening for me. I'm not a financial guru, so I struggle with this probably a little more than some of the others. I'm glad to hear that Richboro is still on the agenda there, as it's the last school that needs to be renovated. But going beyond that, I'm going to piggyback on something that Mr. Solomon has harped on for a while now, and I don't know if we can do it this year because it's obviously too late. At some point in time, we need to go through this budget line by line and figure out what we need and what we don't need and what we can jettison. I liken it to the federal government to a sense. They get a budget every year, and they're afraid that if they don't spend up to that budget, that they're not going to get the money the next year. Well, I'm wondering if there are things in our budget that we have just done year after year after year after year that we really don't need and we can cut because you do want to do some of these initiatives. And like you said, I want to hear from the board or the cabinet, what do they want to see done as opposed to what do we want to see done? And like Mike said, I welcome the comments from the board because I agree with Mr. Hidalgo. Yeah, I would love to see the senior citizens not have to pay an increase in taxes, but as far as I know, that is beyond our level here. That would go up to the state. It's something that they would have to do, and I don't project them giving tax breaks to senior citizens. So once again, it falls back on us, and everything that we do impacts them. And, I'm approaching that age, so I'm especially sensitive to it.
Understood.
Dr. Thorwald, you're not approaching that age. You can go now.
Well, I just shave it off when it gets gray. So I'm spitballing here. I'm mindful after the discussion we had before that when you spitball, it becomes gospel. But what if, I asked for head count for a reason. 75% of our budget is personnel, and we've milked the 25% year after year after year. There's no more blood in that stone. Pigtailing after what Mr. Hickey said, looking for efficiencies, I've seen incentives where I'll give you 2% if you show me 1% in reductions. I'll give you 3% if you show me 1.5%. But that requires a line by line, are we doing this because we've always done it, or are we doing this because we want it? It feels like, and I'm not saying we're doing this, that new initiative, add more people. Instead of use the people we have and lose one of the old initiatives. We have the staff. Are they focused on the right thing or not? It becomes a question of priorities. We can't make everything the priority. We can't, and we cannot take these deficits out of 25% of the budget because they're books, they're power, they're keeping the lights on, and we've done that over and over and over again. There's no more money there. So the only place you can save any money is in the 75% that seems sacrosanct right now. And I don't know that it is. We can use attrition. I'm not asking for layoffs but are we using our people in the right places? Versus that's what they've always done, so there they are. So I would ask, as you prioritize this, think about it that way, that, do we have the staff and can we repurpose them for something else and take them out of what they were doing prior? In some cases we can't. I don't think we have that many who speak and use the Cyrillic language. We're going to have to hire people to do those things for these kids. I get it. So, but think about it. Again, it's not gospel. I'm throwing it out there, so.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Ms. Pally, please.
So I understand, arguments from all sides, and it makes sense that for someone who is on fixed income and they face inflation and every little increase is not going to be good. At the same time, that same person, if they reside in a really good district like Council Rock, that means their property value is going to go up. So when it's time to sell, maybe they will benefit. But looking at this chart, just to bring the business perspective, I think the district resembles like a service industry or a service company. So most of the expenses are salaries and benefits. And my experience is for a service company to succeed, they have to have really good people that provide the service. And I'm not saying there is no fat to be cut, but these people, the really good people, will come to you if you pay them properly and you give them the right benefits. So on the one hand, yes, we want to balance the budget and not have huge increases. On the other hand, we want to provide excellent education, and we want to make this district the best probably in Pennsylvania if we can do that. So in order to do this, we have to figure out what's going to give or take. And maybe we have a long plan and we say, okay, maybe we'll stagger things and slowly we'll get where we want to be. But it's good to think of like all different perspectives and what is our long-term plan when we try to figure this out.
Thank you, Ms. Pelley. Anybody else? Just a couple questions for me, if you would, sir. The Keystone numbers, you mentioned that earlier, and I think we mentioned this at finance. They've been pretty spot on.
They have.
Are we conservative in our estimates?
We are currently conservative.
Very conservative, or
We moved.
are you comfortable in moving that number in the other direction?
I take direction from the board. I will tell you, I have a data point that is outside of myself, that is based on quarterly receipts from taxpayers, and on good authority, Keystone has made a reasonable projection. So if you want to see that revenue realized on that side of the line, I'm happy to make that adjustment.
Yeah, and I think it's important to consider, because we're in the term of considering a whole lot of things.
Sure.
You know, last year, not this board, but the board that was sitting last year, raised taxes 1.99%. It was a struggle for many of us to do that. We understood what it takes to get there. But we also made a decision on buildings last year based around a very conservative budget. And then lo and behold, a couple weeks later, we found some additional money because we were conservative. And fortunately, we had Soul Findstone put online and underway. And Doug, your team's doing a great job up there, I hear. But you know, this may be the year where we stop being so conservative that we go on a little more on the other side, just to put a little more into perspective, because I don't want to go through what I went through last year, because I would rethink how things went if we knew we had that money. So that would only be a suggestion. Charter schools, I would hope, and I've talked about this in the past, I would hope we're recruiting our folks to come back to Council Rock that have left over the last couple of years for whatever reasons. And the other thing is, are we allowed to talk about attrition numbers? Where are they at? You said April 1st. I know it's early. Are we hitting our numbers we're expecting? Are we in line? Can you even say? And if you can't, that's fine too.
I would reserve comment for an executive session, particularly related to personnel.
And that's totally fine too. There's 3 areas right there.
Certainly.
We could grab a couple $1 million, which is a lot for this budget. And that's kind of, I wanted to throw it out there. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Anybody else? Mr. Roosevelt.
I do have a couple questions regarding fifth special. I believe we had 5 specials before the pandemic: art, gym, music, library, and computers. And I believe that computers were removed because all the kids had their own Chromebook on a one-to-one basis. So computers were out. So now we're talking about re-implementing a 5th special, STEAM. I'm excited. I really like that. I think that's extremely important. But I just want to understand a couple of elements here as far as why does this impose a schedule change if we have specials on the other 4 days, and we used to have a 5th special on the 5th day? And why does it impose new staffing requirements if we have probably teachers that can do this already? To Mr. Fellward's point, are we putting people in the right position? Generally, to bounce back a little bit, we want to give our kids the best education that we can afford. and we want the best for them. So we're even probably willing to stretch. That means we want the best teachers here. So I'm not advocating for, slashing here and there. I want to get the best, but this is where we're getting confined. So if you could just help me a little bit with the fifth special, that would be great.
So let me see if I can answer your questions as you gave them. So if I miss one, please ask it again, Mr. Roosevelt. So we had what was called in the schedule a special for computers. However, I would not categorize that as a special as we do library, phys ed, art, and music. The computers was just a time where was designated for the teacher to take their class to the computer lab. There was no designated teacher who taught that special. So the teacher was responsible for all of that instruction. Opposed to the opposite of that is in our other 4 specials, the students go to the art room and an art teacher who's certified in art teaches that particular special for those students. So there's a little bit of a distinguishing between what that computer special was and what this fifth special would be, which would be they would go to a designated location in the building and it would be taught by someone who has the knowledge and the skill set to teach the STEAM curriculum to the students, and it would be a time away from their core classroom teacher or their homeroom teacher. So that's the distinction there and why there's a need for staff for the fifth special. Did I answer all of your questions?
Well, so I guess we'll jump in. Regarding the schedule, is there something else that happens on the 5th day that requires more schedule? I understand the distinction that you've laid out. It makes perfect sense, and I'm happy to hear it, and I think it'll help the community. Was that computer time limit shorter than art and music, et cetera, et cetera?
I would defer to Dr. Sanko, who's shaking his head no, that the time was the same as the other specials.
So, thanks, Chuck, for your help. That time was not different. The challenge or the difference with a fifth special of STEAM in 5th and 6th grade right now in our elementary schools, we have chorus that takes place during the day. So for all intents and purposes, 5th and 6th grade students would have 2 specials potentially on one day. They would have, let me rephrase that. They would have 2 times during the instructional day that they would be away from their homeroom teacher, once to go to chorus and once to go to that 5th special, whether it was art, music, library, phys ed, or STEAM.
So we have more than one special that could happen on the same day?
Not typically, no. But in the case where Dr. Sanko just talked about, by adding this fifth special, yes, for our 5th and 6th graders only, there would be a day where they would have chorus and then would also have one of the other 5 specials. I think you also asked a question about changes in the schedule. So our day starts and ends at a certain time. And within that time frame, we build instructional minutes around the time that we have, including 30 minutes of lunch that the students have, the recess that they have every day, and all of the core subjects that they have in the specials. So when adding this 5th special, one of the things that we look at is how does it impact our instructional minutes across the board. So right now, on the day that students don't have a special, there's additional minutes there that they're using for language arts or math or one of the core subject areas. When we add this 5th special, what our principals have been looking at is how do we adjust all of the instructional minutes to make sure we have that time for that 5th special and still have sufficient time for the other subject areas that we're required to teach students.
Thank you. Anybody else at this point? Yes, sure. Dr. Thorwart, please.
What kind of certification would a STEAM teacher have? I mean, do elementary teachers have STEAM certification, or is it just general ed?
So depending upon how we structure what we call this special, if we call it STEAM, then we'll need to make sure we hire people who have a STEAM, like a certificate, like an endorsement, so additional credits in STEAM. If we do not call it STEAM, but call it something else, we can hire teachers who have a lot of coursework experience in working with STEAM. We have some very strong internal candidates who would be people who would probably be interested in teaching that, who have a lot of knowledge, and would be able to continue to learn and grow and develop that knowledge around the concepts and the areas of STEAM that we would be looking at.
I just didn't realize there was a piece of paper for STEAM now, too. So,
Mr. Hickey.
I'll just piggyback on what Dr. Thorward said, though. What's involved with getting this piece of paper? How many hours of coursework? And then my second question, and just as a follow-up, what is the amount of time that we spend in a special each day at the elementary school?
So I'll answer the last question first. Our specials are 40 minutes, right? 40, am I correct? Yes, 40 minutes across all grades. And with kindergarten is the exception. Kindergarten specials are a little shorter. And the endorsement, I don't know the exact number of credits, but because it's not another full certification, it doesn't typically require as much. Christine does? Oh, great, thank you. Sorry, Ms. Taylor.
You're fine. So endorsements are short programs not to exceed 12 credits. And the endorsements are in new and emerging areas. STEAM is one of the areas, so it's not a long program. 12 credits is the max.
Thanks.
Are you aware if we have people on staff now with those certs? I'm sure we have a couple. I could name at least one or two.
Can't give you a definite answer.
But we do have people.
Have endorsements.
There's people.
There's autism endorsements, STEAM endorsements. There's a number of them.
Anybody else? Good. Mr. Harris, thank you. You can sit now.
Thank you.
Stay away from Dr. Lambert. Will knock stuff over. Good evening, Mrs. McKee. We're going to go to Education Committee, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salmon. The Education Committee met on March the 24th. We had 2 agenda items. The first being a presentation to the board from administrators representing each level, along with some curriculum coordinators. The topic being supporting our students' learning, both during and after the pandemic. Items that we covered are questions like what is happening at the building level, what does our local data show us, and what do we need to do to continue providing support for our students. I know that this has been an item really on the minds of the board. How are our students succeeding? What do they need from us? How are they recovering from some disruption in their educational program? And I know we were very appreciative of the time that each of these professionals took to be with us and answer questions. I know that it's been a focus for us. I know we want to hear back some information going forward to be updated on this topic. I expect that we will be hearing further information in upcoming meetings. And while not on behalf of the board, I just personally want to say how very much I appreciate what's happening in the classrooms every day. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Teachers are extremely aware of what their students need, and they are in the best position to provide that. And I just want to congratulate them. It's been difficult for them, along with every family and every student. So I want to personally say thank you. We are aware of the efforts that happen every day in the classrooms. Additionally, we had a report from Cropper, a very detailed demographic report. Cropper, you may remember, is the company that did similar work for us a few years ago in preparation for our redistricting. This report will help inform our future decision-making regarding anticipated enrollment numbers, along with building usage and utilization. That concludes my report regarding our meeting. Our next meeting will be April 25th.
Can I have a second, please?
Sorry, second.
Mr. Hickey with a second. Any objections? Any further board comment? All right, hearing none, I'm going to ask the secretary, mark that unanimous. Letter C, Bucks County IU, Ms. Pally, please.
So the last Bucks County Intermediate Unit meeting, there is usually a lot of things that happen, which is like, business as usual. I just chose to give you some information about things that may be applicable to Council Rock. So the IU has licensed the summary of educational mandates to serve as an informational tool for public school administrators and directors, and I forwarded these documents to you earlier today. I think they're like great resource. They're lengthy, but it's great information. So as we know, they provide assistance with our search for the superintendent, and they also provide assistance for the superintendent search for the Bristol Borough. So I guess we're competing with them for like superintendent. So, and something else that was very interesting, they talk about supporting schools with therapy dogs, and the Central Bucks District has been using that a lot. There's, it's Roxy Therapy Dogs, if you want to check their website. And they can come in at the time of crisis, or maybe just if children have reading challenges, they can read to the dogs. And it's something to consider, especially as we face different crises. So I know we talked about Council Rock has almost zero increase in cost for healthcare. I just wanted to know you to know that the IU participates in Bucks Montgomery County Schools Healthcare Consortium, and there are about 11 districts that participate in that, and they provide coverage to 5,200 employees and 14,000 members, and they benefit from efficiencies in the benefits as well as savings. So I'm sure you have looked into that before, just something to keep in mind as we go forward. And the next board meeting is next month. It's this month, April, yeah.
Great, thank you. MBIT, Mr. Hickey, please. Oh,
If I would.
sorry, Dr. Thorward.
Pally triggered something that I'm going to kick to Mr. Cox and the policy committee for later. You mentioned therapy dogs. I don't know that we have a policy that says therapy dogs in our schools are insured or whatever. I mean, I'm going to ask Rob, not now, but can we look into that? Should we be carrying, any dog that comes into school, should it be carrying some kind of liability shield, or do we own that? That sort of thing. I think it's a good idea. I mean, I hear about therapy dogs all the time, but that can go, they're animals, that can go sideways, and I just want to make sure we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's as we go forward.
Dr. Thor, we in the past have handled that by having a provision in the contract with the provider that requires them to indemnify the district and carry appropriate insurance.
And I'll look to our administrative team. Are we honoring, we don't have dogs in our schools that don't have a carrier, a contract with them?
We have supplemental insurance from those dog owners, that in case, the unlikely case that a dog does attack or bite, that they cover the expense rather than the board.
Say that again.
The subrogation of the insurance, the insurance of the individual, the dog owner, would cover the incident rather than the board incurring the expense of the injury to the student or staff member.
We enforce policy terms on that, or we just assume it happened?
No, we do. I have copies of every subrogation and every additional named insured. When a dog crosses the threshold, Council Rock is named as additional named insured.
Good, okay. MBIT, Mr. Hickey, please.
We had a committee of the whole meeting on Tuesday, and we will have a board meeting on next Monday. Mr. Spector, he gave basically the update of what's happening at the school and what the students are doing. I appreciate that every time that they come in and do it. The problem we have, we're actually now going through our budget as well at MBIT, and our budget impacts this budget. There was a bit of a surprise thrown at us. As you know, MBIT has had an increase in enrollment, and basically what's happening is there's not enough space at the school to accommodate the students who want to attend there, at least not with their first choice. So we had a lengthy discussion about different options that could occur, and I was hoping to have something back from the director at MBIT of what we discussed and other variables, because as I said, what happens there affects here. One of the biggest problems, one of the biggest enrollments that we've had there is in electrical technology, and there's just not enough room there to accommodate the students who want to do it. But to add a second room in that area, the cost is $250,000, of which we share some of that cost. I know that Mr. Harris and Superintendent Elliott, they were just made aware of that the other day, and basically we found out. So I was hoping to have some more information, which I'm going to distribute to the board to get some feedback from them on where do you want to be with this, because this is not an arbitrary decision that is made by me. I'm representing the Council Rock Board and Ms. Marcel as well. And I'm going to need some feedback on where we go, what are some of the different options. I mean, one of the options was, you know, just to offer the program to juniors and seniors, but do you really want to omit sophomores from the programs? So we're trying to think of inventive ways and how to use the space up there so we can accommodate as many people as possible. That second electrical room is most likely out. I don't see it being within any school district's budget, not at this stage of the game. And these letters to these kids have to go out next week. It's a nice problem to have, but like I said, it impacts our budget directly, and hopefully we can find some innovative ways. Like one of the things we talked about, like for example, this room here, we have one, there's one up at MBIT. To use that for some of the classrooms that you don't need the hands-on, you can use, you know, you can put a bunch of computers there, you can have kids there, you can break the rooms up, and maybe you can accommodate more kids. The idea being is to get as many kids as possible into these programs without an exorbitant cost to each sending school district. And like I said, I hope to have some information for you guys by the end of the week as far as a matrix, and I'd appreciate any feedback you can give me.
Mr. Hickey, we had a meeting earlier today to talk about the capital costs for MBIT, which the board has already borrowed the money to make the payment in July. And it did come up as a point of discussion, and the early discussion was about a $500,000 add to the budget, of which potentially an $85,000 increase to tuition. So that's just a rough estimate on the low end. And I raised the flag that this budget, their budget is coming to Finance Committee for review this month, and then eventual consideration on the agenda in May. So the sooner we have those numbers to get it in front of Finance, so this board can contemplate impact to Council Rock. I underscored that, and certainly I want to be able to contemplate that in any future budget that we have. But I appreciate you mentioning that it is a good problem to have, but it is a little late in the hour because we're building our budget and we want to make sure that we are covering the students that we have currently.
Sure, and I apologize. I mean, I can't apologize for something I wasn't a part of. However, I apologize because I was given the impression that Dr. Elliott and you were made aware of this before this week.
I was today old, sir.
It's a good problem to have. It's just that building is just at its limit. I mean,
yeah, and like every of the buildings that we do here, it also has its challenges. The roof was just replaced. They're looking to replace 156 computers. like you said, they have their budgets just like we do, and they have their issues, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hickey. Council Rock, Education Liaison, Mr. Tate, please.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. The hour's late, so I'll be brief. We had a board meeting Monday night. Dr. Elliott was there. We had a real good discussion about some long-term possibilities. More later, but the important thing is June 20 is our golf outing, and it's the best time that you can imagine. Mr. Cox will attest. So please put that on your calendar, June 20, 9 a.m., Philmont Country Club. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to, we just did policy. We're going to jump down to Finance Committee. Mr. Aldago, please.
Thank you, Mr. Solomon. So the Finance Committee met on March 10th, and at that meeting, we pushed the last item on the agenda to the beginning, and that was about an hour discussion on transportation. And at that point, we had now spoken to both vendors who bidded, and tonight we are going to have a motion up there to get ready for next year, because it's important that we get these contracts in place. Then we went on and we talked about some professional development software, old ones sunsetting and new ones that were proposed, and that's going to be on the agenda for tonight, I guess, as part of the consent agenda. Then we talked about some budget transfers for PC repair or for computer repair, and I was just wondering if that was part of the general fund, Mr. Harris.
It is, it's covered in item C.
Okay, thank you. And then for items for discussion that night, we talked about food service update, some policies to the insurance policy that we have, some updates. We talked first phases of the revenue budgets and process and the 5-year projections. There's a lot of talking about that, and the capital projects updates, or from a finance standpoint, I guess. And then that's about it. A transportation update, thank you for that. And I'm going to give it over to Mr. Harris if you want to add anything before I go to the consent items.
No, Mr. Hidalgo, I think you covered it very well, but it's almost a month since our last finance meeting, so it feels like it's a very long time ago. So I'm appreciative of the board's consideration to change the sequence of events so that we can have best data right before the meeting, so that we can put our best foot forward in an action meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So with that being said, I move to approve consent agenda items B through E as contained in attachment to this agenda.
Second.
Second, Mr. Tate. Any objections? Any further comments from the board? Hearing none, I'm going to ask the secretary to mark that unanimous as well. Keep going, Joe F.
All right, so I move to approve the agreement for the transportation of pupils with Durham School Services LP in the form attached to this agenda and is subject to final solicitor review.
Second.
Second is Dr. Thorwart. Any objections? Any further comment from the board on this subject? Hearing none, I'm going to ask the secretary to mark that unanimous as well.
Do we want to offer anybody a comment or not, or is that up to you? I don't know if anybody in the audience wants to comment. No. Nope. We'll move on. Okay. Let's move on then.
Letter G.
All right. Sorry. Let me click there. G. Okay. I move to approve the TJ Consulting Agreement not to exceed $5,000.
Second, Dr. Thorwart. Any further board comment or objection? Hearing none, I'm going to ask the secretary to mark that unanimous. Mrs. McKee, you want to take the personal actions?
Sure. I move to approve the personnel actions and the personnel actions addendum as contained in the attachment to this agenda.
A second, please.
Second.
Second, Mr. Hickey. Any board comment about this? I'd like to make a comment. Dr. Lambert, you're on this piece of paper this evening. You notified the board a month ago that you were willing or wishing to retire. A couple of us, I think I told you leave your phone on, and you did. We asked you to stick around a little longer, and you did, and you will. And my personal thank you for doing that. We need you a part of this team during transition. I'm sorry to Mrs. Lambert for delaying her around-the-world vacation. Oh, you didn't tell her yet, I guess. I'm sorry. But yeah, I needed to thank you personally for that, sir. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I'm sure she.
Mr. Salomon, I'll second that. I mean, I know I reached out as well, and this is a big deal, and I'm appreciative of it. I know you had a kind of a rotten week this week, and it sincerely good to have you stick around for a little while.
Any other comment from the board? No objections? Hearing none, mark that unanimous, please. Mrs. McKay, please.
I move to approve the Personnel Action Assistant Director of Business Administration as contained in the attachment to this agenda.
Second.
Second, Mr. Tate. Any objections from the board? Any comments from the board? Mr. Hickey.
Not so much a comment. I just have a question that I need to direct to Mr. Harris and to Ms. Taylor, and then we can do this individually. I just want to make sure that you are 100% your decision, you're comfortable with this decision.
100% comfortable with this decision.
So we interview by committee and we have teams. I'm 100% comfortable, I want to say that first, but we have interview committees and teams, so it's not a single person's decision.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, hearing none, I'll ask the secretary to mark that unanimous consent. Facilities. I'm sorry, Mrs. McKee, just for clarification, did you combine H and I?
Yes, I combined.
Okay, thank you. From there, we're going to move to facilities. I don't know who's taking it. Mr. Tate, Mr. Roosevelt.
Yes, I will be brief, given the late hour. Facilities Committee met March 17. We got an update on current projects, and progress is steady with no major problems. We got a lot of details from Mr. Taylor, and I appreciate that very much. We discussed the agenda items and as well future work, including we had a lengthy discussion about Richboro Elementary School as well. And there is an agenda item that I want to call out because it's real positive, and it has to do with, it's item B, the capital improvement project closeout change orders. Mr. Taylor, if you would, just summarize that for us.
Sure, that's a closeout change order from the project here at Chancellor Center from a few years back. We've been working with the contractor on getting the painting issues resolved here, and we finally have completed that, and to our satisfaction. So this is the remaining allowance monies from that project.
And that's for $12,000, almost 13, but the grand total there is $465,000. That's a summary of other change orders, is that true?
Yes, that's a summary of credits back to the district from those projects. We've had a very successful run of summer projects and the wrap up of the Star Center as well. So we're doing well as a team.
Thank you, sir. Our next meeting is April 28th, so the agenda items. I move to approve consent agenda items B through D as contained in the attachments to this agenda.
Second.
Second, Mr. Roosevelt. Any objections? Any comments from the board? All right, hearing none, I want to ask the secretary to mark that unanimous as well. Moving forward, the second set of public comment. I want to go down the list of the checks that were non-agenda items. Mr. Cox, you have your handy. First up is Wendy Nowicki from Newtown. Good evening. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Thank you. I think enough was said earlier by the students, so I'm fine for tonight. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next on the list, Nicole Khan.
Good evening. I too will pass on my time this evening. Thank you.
Next up is Susan Turner. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you? Susan Turner, obviously. I'm the president of Newtown Borough Council, and I apologize for showing up without any notice, but we had a discussion at our work session last night that I found really concerning and thought was urgent enough to come and talk to you folks about tonight. We have some parents who are really concerned about the routes that their kids are walking to school, and specifically they're crossing Washington Avenue at Norwood. And as we all know, Washington Avenue is not a great place to cross. Officially, we were asked to put in a crossing guard. We agreed to do that. But after investigation, it looks like that's really not appropriate based on the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, I guess, Part 7 that talks specifically about school access. And so the recommendation is that the kids walk down to Lincoln, cross there, then walk back up Washington. But parents have expressed a lot of concern about that being even more dangerous than crossing at Norwood. We talked about petitioning to have crossing there, and I don't actually know what your safe school routes map looks like, but we talked about doing that. But that would almost certainly require putting a stop sign on, or putting stop signs on Washington at Norwood. And it appears that that kind of a request has to come from the school board, not from Borough Council. So we wanted to urge you to consider that and also to offer our support and help in whatever we can do. We also have a walk-friendly traffic committee that is very passionate about trying to improve access. So I'm very concerned. We all know about the accidents we've had with pedestrians and little kids crossing Washington Street. It is a real concern. So I would very much like us to take some action before someone gets hurt.
Just may I ask, is this your official notification?
And I apologize. We will certainly send you a letter, or we can, but our meeting was last night, and because you were meeting tonight, I didn't want to.
No, that's great, because the team's here that would dive right into that, so.
I really appreciate it. I think it's really important, and thank you for your.
Absolutely, yes, thank you. Next up is it Tara McLaughlin from Newtown Borough? Hi, good evening.
Good evening, Tara Grundy McLaughlin, Newtown Borough. I actually did come here for 109 and put myself in the wrong slot. And thank you very much for your vote. And my primary point was that every single book in that library of every school was put there by either the librarian, the counselor, or a teacher, all of them professional educators, put there with choice and care. So as Dr. Elliott's, I'm calling it yours because that was sort of your idea at putting that policy into place to have a process and not just on each individual principle. I urge that to be considered in that process, that it be looked at carefully and with real knowledge of the book and the educational purpose that there was seen in it when it was initially purchased. And then a follow-up, a completely different topic, but on the agenda tonight was the list of initiatives, and one of them was the early start, and I know that got delayed and due to the pandemic, but it's still an issue, and we have that report, which I didn't come here prepared to speak on this, so I don't have the name of it, but I think you all know what I'm talking about, the one that came from the state of Pennsylvania not too long before the pandemic, talking about the mental health issues, about the academic difference that is really truly seen when adolescents of the high school age have to get here early. So as a parent of 4 Council Rock children, I've had students in the district since 2003. High schoolers number 3 and 4 are there now. While they may not see the benefit of it, I hope my freshman does. And I really want to strongly advocate for that difference for the kids and to really keep that initiative on top. I know the budget is a struggle. We go through it too. So thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Next up is Barbara Simmons, also from Newtown Borough. Barbara Simmons. Okay, thank you. Next up is Ellen from Washington Crossing. Last name starts with an R? Yes. Next up would be Steve Kike. Good evening. Can you just say your last name for the record, sir?
C-I-C-K-A-Y. I want to borrow some of Ellen's time. Anyway, earlier tonight, the students spoke so eloquently about such an important subject. The students, they give me so much hope for the future. I didn't want to lower the quality of the discussion then, so I'm speaking now about the subject, although from the point of view of first principles. I got a copy of the Constitution. Although we have won the battle this evening, the war for the soul of American democracy rages nationally. So I feel these words must be said to steel you for future fights. Again, my name is Steve C.K. I moved to Newtown in 1985 along with my wife and 2 children since I heard stories about the excellence of Council Rock Public School System. Luckily for my family, those stories turned out to be true. My son graduated from Council Rock High in 2000 and was accepted into an Ivy League school, Brown University. My daughter graduated in 2004, received a full scholarship to BU. I recently asked them what books they read in high school. I promptly received a list of over 30 great works of literature, which evidently made a memorable impression on them. There was no talk of censorship or limiting access to books back then. On the contrary, their minds were open to a wide diversity of authors and ideas, which is what education should be all about. I didn't want to talk politics tonight because the focus should be on educating our children. But this un-American issue of censorship and restricting access to books is here before us, not because of a sincere concern for how best to educate our children, but because of an extreme, reactionary, well-financed agenda of the far right to create an emotional, divisive culture war issue in the hope of restoring the political power they lost in 2020. For it is self-evident that the minds of our youth are not expanded by restricting their diet of great creative ideas found in books. The minds of our youth should, on the contrary, be exposed to as many diverse voices as possible as they develop critical reading, writing, and thinking skills that will aid them later in life as they greet a complex world full of exciting new challenges. More, not less, is the watchword of a good education. The far right often brings up our beloved Constitution when they express their fervent desire to cling to their
30 seconds, sir.
When to this day kill so many of our children, even in our schools. But somehow they are silent about the rights in our Constitution embodied in the First and 14th Amendments when it conflicts with their radical, reactionary, and sometimes racist and homophobic ideology. Americans are guaranteed freedom of speech by our Constitution and its First Amendment, and yet there is an ugly national movement underway to ban the reading and discussion of books. History reminds us of Nazis burning the books that threatened their ideology, and before long they were then killing people who did not fit in with their sick agenda. Who decides what we can speak about?
Sir, that's 3 minutes. Thank you.
Shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech.
Thank you, appreciate it. Next up, Burnell Holmes. You're not Burnell. Good evening. Well, can you state your name for the record, please?
Good evening. I am Burnell Holmes, and I'm a resident of Richboro. And I stand before you as the mother of 4 children in this district, with my youngest in the autistic support program at Holland Elementary. In 2021, the board adopted a resolution supporting the development of an anti-racist school climate. My children attend 4 different schools, and I am here to tell you the district has and is failing its students. Since this resolution was adopted, there has been little to no improvement in the culture of this school district. This is also evident at every board meeting when there has been discussions about eliminating anything pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And sadly, this trickles down to the very fabric and walls of this school community. My children are one of the few, if not the only Black children in their classes, and every year, I have to contact teachers and principals to discuss why Black History Month was not acknowledged. I want you as a board and the school district to know that my 7th grader and her friend took it upon themselves with the support of their English teacher to hold their very own Black History presentation because your schools failed to. I have had teachers tell me how amazing my children are, but they are never included or recommended for gifted programs or honors classes, even after receiving all A's. My children have had students try to touch their hair. They hear the N-word used repeatedly. They have to educate others. They defend themselves. And I just learned recently that one of them wanted to attend a different school. So now this has turned into a mental health issue. It is not my children's responsibility to educate others or to be the ones to address every racial slur they hear. And slurs being heard are also directed to students with special needs. My children are raised in a home where they are affirmed, exposed to different cultures and different abilities, and this is why they are compassionate, they're bold, confident, they are advocates, and they are what the future looks like. And I refuse to let this district or anyone try to tear down the work that my husband and I, along with our village, do on a daily basis. Listen, my 6-year-old with autism, he's pretty cute now, and he melts the heart of anyone he comes in contact with.
30 seconds.
One day, he will be older at the middle and the high school, and this mother will be at the school every day, if needed, to ensure he is protected. And I am already aware of our high school students harassing students with special needs in the hallways of Council Rock North. Change starts from the top down, and what this district needs is strong leadership, accountability, and honestly, a miracle. My hope is that a miracle happens before we send another student out into this world unprepared. Every child should attend school free from harassment and discrimination, just like your resolution promised. And I leave you with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. It is not possible to be in favor of justice for some people and not be in favor of justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. From there, we'll move to board comment. Any new business from the board? Sure, you stayed this long. Come on up. Okay. You in the back? Just state your name for the record, and you know this drill, 3 minutes.
Name's Kevin Campbell. I'm from Upper Makefield. The students tonight exemplified the pride of this district. The students see the strength and unity in this community. Unfortunately, this board has become infected by outside politics that ultimately led to the removal of our superintendent, who only wanted to put the kids first. Some even advocated in their campaigns that that was their primary goal. A decision was made, and the community was not involved with that. We were asked just recently what we think a new superintendent should be. Well, if you ask me, he was already here. The students tonight mentioned the lack of leadership and what a lack of a superintendent is in the school. They're feeling it. Your actions have gone down to the students. There were 2 students here tonight that mentioned it. I find it ironic that the board wants our input now. We elected you. You should know what to do. You should know what a superintendent looks like and what the characteristics are. If you're going to use that survey down the road to slap us in the face and say, well, this is what you want, you can throw it away. You guys know what a superintendent is and what it should do, and you already had one, and you let them get away. Your decision has taught the students that it's okay to bully someone. Just like the speaker earlier, it's okay to bully someone into resigning or making them a scapegoat. You didn't do anything for this community when you let Dr. Frazier go. You brought us down and you tarnished the school board, not the student body, but this board. And I find it's going to be very tough to bring someone in here to replace him, given what you have done recently. And it's a surprise that a lot of people haven't come up here to say that. But I would bet you there's a lot more people out in the audience today that feel the same way I do. Lastly, on the budget, there are people sitting on these chairs today that voted So Feinstein down for the right reason, and it came back wrongly to be voted on, and we're feeling in the impact today with the financial burdens that it's going to cost us downstream. So I would applaud you guys to listen to
30
your
seconds.
colleagues. Listen to what they're saying. Some of them are right on the mark with what we should do and what we shouldn't do. Listen to each other. Take the politics out of it. Do what's right for the community and do what's right for the students. Thank you.
Thank you. If you would, just state your name and what township you're from. Good evening.
My name is Valerie Mahalik. My family resides in Newtown. First of all, thank you all for being here. To serve the way that you do is not easy, so we appreciate it. I sent this email to my school board member back in March. I'm just going to read it to you to expedite the time. We just wanted to make you and the entire school board aware of what an outstanding job the faculty at both Council Rock North and Newtown Middle School did with their most recent school play and school musical. As a former teacher myself from New York, who has a theatrical background and has directed school plays, I understand all of the time, creativity, dedication, commitment, and patience that are needed to pull off a good production. Trying to do this, however, in the middle of a pandemic where plays and musicals stopped for 2 years is not an easy thing to accomplish. Both of our daughters were fortunate to be in their school play. Our one daughter was in Steel Magnolias at the high school, and our younger daughter was in The Sound of Music at Newtown Middle School with Mr. Dolan. We just moved to this district in August, and being a part of the plays not only helped elevate their confidence, but enabled them to feel as if they were now a part of the school. Additionally, this has been a challenging year for our family. I was recently re-diagnosed with stage 3 cancer and had surgery at Memorial Sloan Kettering this past October. Additionally, our 12-year-old daughter in December fell and ended up having major surgery at CHOP in Philadelphia with 3 screws inserted into her hip. She was on crutches for most of the Sound of Music rehearsals, but always felt welcome while navigating how to walk around with an injured leg. Watching her on stage this past weekend in March, even dancing, was a huge accomplishment. It could not have happened without the support of Mr. Dolan and his team. Our 16-year-old daughter, who had major upper respiratory infections in September, also thrived in Steel Magnolias, especially at a time when she was helping me with my recovery. Both girls cried when the plays came to an end, because it brought them so much joy. We truly feel so blessed to have relocated
30
to such an
seconds.
incredible district where the children feel cared about. Kudos to the directors and staff who work relentlessly during such challenging times. And I also just want to acknowledge Mr. Harris, who joined the pit band with Mr. Dolan at the last minute. And it was wonderful to see one of our administrators involved with the children. So if you're ever looking to cut anything from the budget, please reconsider the arts, because when you were at these performances, the audience went crazy, seeing our children on the stage, socializing, and feeling like they have a life again. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. Is there anybody else in the audience? You stuck with us this long? All right. Any new business from the board? Any old business from the board? All right, hearing none. That adjourns the meeting.